This episode is supported by Enscape, empowering your design workflow by turning your BIM model into an immersive 3D experience. Do it.
So I guess the other day I reached out to you and said, hey, do you want to listen to a free lecture from
architecture lecture? What's that?
I know, right?
Gosh, it's been a long time.
And I'm glad that they're doing them again. And I know that it was still a virtual one. And so to me, it's always still, especially like ones that are architects or work or mission is something that speaks to me. It's always like really something kind of awesome to watch, listen to, and whatnot. Yeah, it was funny. So what we're talking about, what I'm rambling on about, is the other day.
Get to the point.
Yeah, the other day, I had seen that the New York Architectural Society
League.
Sorry, the New York Architectural League has a lecture series, which they've never disappointed, and I've been to a couple of them. I think we went and watched Marlon Blackwell and a couple of other ones through there. And they're, again, always kind of fantastic. And so I saw one coming up that was about the rural studio and about sustainable and affordable housing, which to me, just to see the evolution of the rural studio, or just anything on the rural studio, of course, I'm going to run to watch and listen in. And so, I sent it off to you. I sent it off to a couple of other people, and you had noted that people were like, "Hello from Saskatchewan."
Cormac Phelan here from Huntington Beach, California.
And so it was just like, yeah. And so people who were following the link that I sent them were saying, "Greetings from Huntington Beach," or there's
they're
like so many,
there's popping up in the chat.
Cormac Phelans all across the country watching this thing. Greetings from Baltimore, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm not any of those places. I'm right here in good old Bethesda, Maryland."
Yeah. That is a cool thing about these kinds of lectures too, is that people do just chime in the chat to say hello. Like I was just on a AIA technology and architectural practice thing. I think we talked about it a little bit on this, but that is one nice thing, is like when people are arriving, they're genuinely just like, there's some cool little greetings that happen. And I appreciate that, because we aren't in real place, real people, real place. We're in virtual space. So it's nice to see that happen. People aren't just totally like hiding behind their computer.
And it also, in a way, it's also letting you know that there are actual people out there listening to you. And it's not, you're just like, am I just speaking to myself in a screen and hopefully somebody's listening?
Well, it's funny because if you're like a panelist, if you're on the presentation side of it, you just see a number of people until somebody asks a question. So it's just like, oh yeah, there are 100 people here. It's like, okay, that you're just numbers to me.
And so the good interaction's cool. No, you had mentioned when we were chatting, and even after we had chatted and stuff, you had mentioned. So the lecture was specifically about, and if I can remember what the name of it was, so it was called The Rural Studio, The Challenges of Sustainable Rural Living. And it was presented by Andrew Freear and Rusty Smith, who were both longtime professors there, director and professors. And it's so interesting because, I knew both of them early in their career. Both of them arrived at Auburn when on my, second return to being a student. And it's so funny to see Andrew. I had made note that in like the first, I don't know, maybe 3-4 sentences, Andrew, a Brit, had said y'all so many times. It's just like, and I remember, so like his first semester teaching at Auburn was on main campus. And here's a guy who, it made a good connection with him. He was a good professor, good architect, turned into a great professor. And, here he's he's coming from, he's from London, then he moved to Chicago, and so he was this very
He's a city
he
boy.
was a city boy. He was such an urbanite. He I won't say that he kind of like looked down at like being a professor at a, kind of like an Alabama college, but it was definitely out of his element of the time.
Fish out of water. Yeah.
And it's so funny to see him now, because though his accent is different from like the accent of other people who live in Hale County, it's still, he's a rural boy now.
Yeah, right.
He definitely has embraced the life of being a architectural professor in a rural setting for people who want to do good in the world of architecture. And it's just so amazing to kind of like see his transition, because he was even commenting about, it's like, oh, I hate Zoom. And, and he was just like fumbling around in the technology and stuff like that. And I'm like,
I hope you all can hear me, or something like that. Yeah.
I was just like, has he really become that much of a Luddite from like this kind of like prim, proper urban architect to like this damn city folk making me get on this damn contraption? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Is this thing on? It's just like, wow, Andrew, like the evolution of not only him as an architect, but him as a human. It's just interesting to see from a perspective of somebody who saw him when there was no gray hair, when, there were no like bags under his eyes. There were no, it was just this,
Is this a good transformation or a bad one?
No, it's not even, it's not good, bad, or indifferent. It's just, it's somebody who lives and loves what he does, and the mileage shows a little bit, but it's still just, it's very much to me, his transformation reminds me of the rural studios transformation. People were going out to the rural studio not only as a chance to kind of like be a kind of like designer, builder, swinging the hammer, helping, like really doing kind of like good social work on a single house scale. And that's what it was early on, as we were doing, this studio was doing work for individual families, doing single family housing, and the evolution of the studio to providing like now housing, working on and helping solve community projects and problems, seeing that. What was interesting about this particular seminar is that they were talking about how people even, it didn't even matter like how much the house cost, that they started going into the 20K houses and talking about all of these different the solutions that they've been developing and working with other universities to kind of help develop these solutions for affordable housing. And then Rusty Smith, he had started talking about how one of the biggest challenges was people getting mortgages for even the smallest of monetary figures, because of all of the social services that didn't exist. And so they were trying to help solve one problem, but then another problem, arose by saying, okay, this is all great, but these people can't get finance for this home because they don't have fire service. And so then they turned to the studio, they turned to the students, they turned to Andrew and Rusty and basically said, hey, you've been helping us solve this one challenge. Here's this other challenge that we have. And so there's this symbiotic relationship between, the mission that it was, the mission that it wants to be, and then like, how do you want to, how do you mesh that all together with like these social services? And it was like talking about this balance between like, equitable housing and social services, and how this studio can help enact change for the community. And it was just, so every time I see Andrew get grayer and grayer, I don't think he's I think he's like my age, might be a little bit older than me, not by much. And, it's just so funny to like, when I met him in my late 20s, I met him in my late 20s, and here I am about to hit 52. And to just see that evolution, the mileage on him but the transformation professionally reflects the transformation of that studio and all of the great work that they've done out there, and all the great work that he and Rusty have done out there to like really advance this to not just be, there was a time when, people were just going out there because it was a change. Then there were people who were going out there because it was a resume builder kind of thing. But every time somebody goes out there thinking about like, ooh, this is going to be really cool. There's an altruistic, there's kind of the slightly selfish. Anytime anybody goes out there, regardless of what their motives were when they went out there, they will change. Yeah. And they will become better, and they will become more in tune with. And that's sort of how he beat, the changes that I see in Andrew just, from this one lecture that we sat through. But it's kind of like this testament of just like everybody goes in with some kind of like preconceived notion, but then when you go through it, when you live through the experience, and this is kind of could be general, it could be specific to the rural studio, you come out of it because you've lived it. You come out of it different.
This is a lot like community service on many levels, or mission trips for church youth groups, and everybody goes. And I think architecture doesn't necessarily fall into this category so cleanly. I think what we're talking about here is the anomaly, because I think architects generally do go in to change things, but not be changed, right? And I think it might happen on small ways on projects when you're working with particular clients or groups. But in this, especially over 30 years, right, that you're talking about with Andrew in Hale County, and just thinking about, you can see how much it has changed him rather than the other way around, him changing it. I mean, it is both. It is a symbiotic relationship and outcome, but you can really see it. And I think, when I think about his demeanor when he's presenting, and we should say, we'll put a link to the YouTube video in the show notes so that everybody can watch it. And I think you'll get a lot out of it if you do. So I recommend it. But he's just kind of laid back. He read the whole thing like it was prepared ahead of time. And to me, it looked like this is the best I can do right now on many levels, which I think we can all
doesn't it somewhat reflect like the times we're living in right now?
I totally think it does. And I also think it, when the way he started off the presentation, and he's living there, I'm sure, a lot of the time. And he talked about just kind of setting the tone of what it's like to live in that area and what rural means. And he kind of states all the statistics up front in the presentation. And when he's talking, like you mentioned earlier, when he's like, is this thing on, right? Like he said he has satellite internet service that is 1,141% slower than the national average. And that it's like, how can we expect, equity in the world when clearly there is no equity for even access to information and resources? And the way that he was coming across, which it's like, is this thing on? Because it actually just never works, right?
Yeah.
And that's his reality. But he reminded me so much of my grandfather, who was a geologist in Death Valley, and like at the top of his field, but also just super real, and like this dirty dude who just does the work. And I love that. I think it's super authentic. And he reminded me of like Steve Bodanes when I met with him when I was just out of college, and the stuff that the Jersey Devils were doing, like it's design build. Like you get out there and you swing the hammer and you pour the concrete and you teach people how to do that so that they can teach other people how to do that, and they can have a hand in the process and ownership and all of those things, and make a real difference through understanding, like learning by doing at the most, basic level. But I just felt like they talked a little bit about rural studio perhaps being misnamed or something at the beginning. I can't remember the actual words they said. Do you remember?
Yeah. I remember.
It was something.
I remember, but I don't remember exactly what they were.
Yeah. I mean, but I was just thinking, man, it's real studio. Like it's.
Yeah.
because they were talking about the difference between rural and urban, and shifting project types, and they felt like they kind of boxed them in or something like that. But they're very real. Like, and that's what I appreciate the most about it. And every time I do see something coming out of this crew, this group, the school, I always feel like they're doing the real work. They're doing something that I wish more architects would get involved in. They actually are changing the world, and they're not just going from one elite client to the next, right? In fact, exactly the opposite.
They're going to people who, not only would they ever imagine having anything designed by an architect, and that's why there's a quote from the Citizen Architect movie, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's where Jay Sanders is sitting there and he's talking to someone, and this guy, I think it's Peanut, and he's talking to Peanut, and he's like, you guys aren't out, you guys aren't out here to help us. You guys are out here to learn,
right.
So that you can, basically go and work for these elite clients and stuff. And what's interesting about that, and so like later on in the movie, you even see this transformation of Peanut's impression of the students because he's now been immersed in the rural studio, and he now sees that it's out there to do good. It's out there to really make a difference to people who would otherwise never have access to an architect. And so that's why I always like flock to try to get to these lectures or these movies, or just, like keeping in touch with what's going on in the rural studio, just to really kind of like see how the architects that are being created at the rural studio in places like this, because there are other places that are popping up, throughout, that are doing these kind of like design build, more mission driven type studios. And so it's kind of great. And funny enough, there's a lot of either people who had rural studio envy, and that's a harsh way of explaining it. And I apologize to all of those people that I may have trivialized it that way, or they were part of the rural studio that branched out and went to other places and got involved with it.
That mission got bigger.
And so the mission got bigger to not just be a conscious architect when you're out in the profession, because, one, that is a hope as well. But also, how can you continue to keep creating this more citizen architect? And so that's one of the great things about like just listening to this one.
Yeah. It reminds me of why, and there's lots of reasons why people get into architecture. And I don't want to make it sound like the reason why I got in is the same as anybody else, actually. But when I watch these types of lectures, it reminds me why I got into the profession of architecture. And that's when I go away from it feeling like it's good to be reminded, and it's also bad to be reminded. Because it's like, well, what am I actually accomplishing? What am I actually doing? Because I do see this body of work and the change that it has created and the way it's affected people so positively. And I know there's elements of that in my work and in what I do. For some reason, it just seems different when I see these presentations.
It's so funny that you say that. And I was doing a little bit of like just self-examination, kind of post that, and then just in general, people do. And so I was thinking about like the project that I'm working on now versus the projects that are being done at the rural studio and places like that. And it couldn't be further from that mission.
They're super divergent. Yeah.
In just the fact that doing something in, albeit educationally based, in that education, this particular facility has a specific mission, and the mission itself is something that I can kind of like get behind. But then you have like people throwing money after money to do all these big, massive developments and things like that. You're just like, and then you look at, the mission of the rural studio, doing things specifically. What that lecture was about is talking about these 20K houses, which 20K houses means 20 houses that are designed and built for $20,000. And I know that a lot of people are just like, how is that, even possible? Well, most of it is volunteered labor. volunteered materials. And in what's interesting about just that in its own right is just the fact that, there are people out there that just want to do good work and they'll volunteer their time. And so to be able to make it a $20,000 home, they'll do things like that, but then you've got these other spectrums of like this. And it was just like kind of lamenting over, like, I guess, I left like doing K through 12, which I always thought was, really for me enriching, because I see firsthand how the K through 12 design work really does kind of affect like so many people through so many different generations of being able to design well done educational facilities so that people can kind of like grow, it not only be a part of the community, but also help kind of like foster, this great place of learning. Not only just for the kids, but also for the teachers and staff that are, that occupy these places. And funny, I was like, well, am I really doing the same kind of like mission driven? And I was like, wait, I actually sort of am. I thought I was just like, going to be, when I said it, I was lamenting over like leaving that side of things and going to more higher ed where they do spend more money, but there is still this mission driven kind of thing. And so I've always been drawn to mission driven architecture. And, though it seems like it's a world away from kind of like the teachings of the Rural Studio, it really isn't, because, there's people still go into these type of things with kind of like this conscientious, just kind of like this kind of like love and desire to actually make like, these educational spaces, like awesome, I guess, or, what I'm getting at, but maybe.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, I do. I see what you're drawing out of that. It's definitely, you do have to look for that kind of stuff to remind yourself.
I guess what I was saying is that I worry that I leave, things like that behind. And then, you sit that back and you kind of like assess or realize that, nah, you really haven't. It may be completely different, but, there is still this kind of like nature of citizenry, or anyway, architectural. How about this? Architectural citizenry. Is that a little bit better?
Citizenship?
Yeah.
I don't know. Citizenry. Let's take a moment and talk about the sponsor of this episode. Enscape is a leading real-time rendering and virtual reality tool for the global AEC market. It plugs directly into your modeling software, giving you an integrated design and visualization process. With Enscape, you can render in real time and walk stakeholders through your rendered model with incredible ease. Your buildings can be experienced long before they are built. More than 200,000 unique monthly users from over 150 countries use Enscape to envision better designs. To learn more or to sign up for a free 14-day trial, visit enscape3d.com/archispeak today. That's enscape3d.com/archispeak.
You and I, we talk about this every time we attend some form of lecture, whether it's in person or these virtual ones, when it relates to the Rural Studio. We always leave with this sense of kind of like longing for projects that they do, similar projects that they do. But it's interesting because we do those projects. We've done those projects. All of our projects in some way, shape, or form really do kind of like that.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about the people who are actually being affected by it.
Yeah.
And the meaning that can be drawn out of that, for sure. I think one of the interesting things about the presentation is he kind of went through the history of projects, not fully encompassed, but projects that they have done over the years, and then kind of handed the presentation over to Rusty, who then, for the second half of the presentation, really did talk about the 20K house and the variations on it and the partnerships that they've created for the R&D. I mean, it really was about like the partnership network that they've created and how important that was to do what they're doing to achieve that mission of scale, right? Like, this is interesting, right? Because it goes from one project at a time to now trying to affect this at a larger scale. I mean, and I guess that kind of ties back to where Andrew started the presentation, talking about how, rural is staying rural. It's interesting to watch population growth in urban areas, but but stay like completely flat in rural areas. And just how the lack of resources doesn't help it get anywhere. If that's a goal, and I kind of think it is, like that's what they see. They see it as a goal of kind of raising the bar and helping the people who need it the most, kind of a thing. And it's really interesting to see how technology and partnerships and scale play back into this rural setting. And I thought about MDC. I thought about going to Monterey Design Conference, which is like the exact opposite of all of this, right? It's about for the most part, it's very kind of high dollar per square foot elite presentation projects types that really do inspire architects in a very different way. And it just made me think, like, this is a better topic for MDC, or this would be a great topic, not maybe better, but just a great topic to kind of bring balance to the practice of architecture. Because at some point, I do think this profession's got to get out of just the elite side of things. And I mean, Rural Studio's doing that. And I'm not trying to say everybody in architecture is on the elite side of things, but the majority of it is. And it does seem to me that projects for the ultra rich they are inspiring, but they're not making a big difference in the way that I think a lot of people think that architecture can do when they enter into school and they enter into the profession.
What's interesting is actually when you make that correlation with MDC and the Rural Studio, I mean, how divergent. I remember you and I at the MDC, and I can't remember the specific architect, but they were talking about this toilet, this kind of like,
oh, that's right.
And I was going through this particular one, and they were talking about like these public toilets and all this other stuff, and they almost like they created almost like high design in a very rural setting for toilets, for public toilets in a public park setting, but it was void of the same kind of pretense that the other one was,
kind of. Yeah, jeez. I say kind of in air quotes, right? Because like it was a toilet in a glass box in a garden surrounded by this organic wall. It was just like
but
talk about a different experience.
But both of them were created for these kind of
that was a great presentation. I remember that.
It was, and I loved it. And actually, God, I wish I could remember who gave the presentation.
We probably covered it in a past episode. If I find it, I'll put a link.
Yeah, we probably did. But but again, what was interesting about it though is just like here are two different responses for the same issue, same function, but in two completely different manners. And one is so very kind of like public access, and then one is like very
super private.
The previous private.
Interesting. I didn't even think of that. Wow, what a range.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And what is interesting about it is that, of the range of the projects that they have, they've done a park that's got baseball fields and everything else because it was, think about all of these different communities. Like to me, I was looking at it as I was kind of like, as the conversation was going on and Andrew was talking about like, rural versus urban, and there's a lot of draw to urban and there's a lot of draw to kind of like these more rural areas and stuff, and one of the worries that people have, I've heard, criticisms, like, oh, you're just going to change the nature of country rural living, with all of these kind of like crazy architectural ideas and all of this other stuff. And they haven't. They do come up with these crazy architectural ideas. They try to like integrate it into the fabric of rural living, and nothing really changes about the rural living other than the facilities that were there that went away are now back. And so now there's an enrichment of services, but there isn't a change in the way that they live. just because they now have a fire station, or just now they have a YMCA, other than the fact that, now kids have a place to go that's covered and sheltered and protected. And, they can go and play at the YMCA or at the baseball fields or, this nature park or the zoo or all of these things that they've been able to bring to them that, again, starts talking about that social equality that like urban areas have, and if you think about it, going all the way back to, his comment about internet equality or sorry, it was is kind of, he was talking about his internet, but he was talking about equality, access equality and access to resources. As much as you can again draw that parallel of Andrew's internet to the rural studio and its effects on that city, because now that city, that town, that county, and now 25 miles outside of that, of the center point of the rural studio, they're enacting this access to resources, access to equality through just these now community-based projects that they're doing, which is
architectural kind of interventions to make that possible,
right? Because we started the lecture off talking about how, like, basically, if 100 and some odd people live there, why would the city, the county, the state, the federal government spend money on a place that has just over 100 people living there?
So few.
When, they've got towns of 100,000, a couple million that, need those services. And so they go where the people are. And so they leave people like rural communities behind. And to be able to have places like this, to be able to kind of like create these, we want to call them interventions. Yeah. I mean, but they're just
there's tons of opportunity there, right? For anybody who's willing to raise their hand and say, I'll do that. Yeah. Cause it isn't going to get you any glory to do it, right? You have to do it for the right reasons. But those opportunities are there. I think that's one of the things that I think Rusty kind of ended the presentation with, through the prompting of, who was moderating it again? I had her name in the top of my head, and then it was gone. Yeah, Julie.
Yeah.
So she asked if, I can't remember what she actually asked. I think it was just kind of like final thoughts. But I think one of the things that Rusty said was, wherever you find yourself, there is a lifetime of work to be done, and do the work.
Yeah.
That's interesting, right? I think one of the things that I see in our profession is everybody who I've kind of identified with, I think on the technology side at least, is very much hungry for more and not satisfied with where we are, knowing that we can be doing so much better. And that's absolutely true. And we also see, people moving around from firm to firm, curating their portfolios and bigger and better projects, in air quotes, because, I think it kind of gets back to the elite commentary, which is just like, yeah, they look great in your portfolio. And then it's just like, what's next? And your eyes get bigger and you want more and you want to work on a better project for, I don't know what better means in this context, but it's amazing to think that like how much opportunity there is out there. And I think this is the feeling I go away from a lecture like this, or watching Citizen Architect, or, we've had this conversation previously with a guest on the show about Rural Studio. And it's just, there is meaningful opportunity to change people's lives for the better with what you already know. And wherever you find yourself, there is a lifetime of work right there to be done. And it's just like, can we be content enough to do that? Because I think we're fighting that side of things for more all the time, for bigger, for better. And again, like those weird words to use, but like everybody, that we live in a consumer-based society and consumption of more and quote unquote better and needing new things and all of that is very real. I mean, that is basic human nature, it seems like. And the opposite is kind of having the contentment of realizing that there's a lifetime of work to be done in the smallest places that need it the most, but still being kind of content enough to sit there and do it and to put the time in.
Yeah. I don't even know where to go from there, because
I don't know where to go from there either, because I think that's where like that self-reflection really came in for me. It's like, if I saw a billboard, that said, wherever you find yourself, there's a lifetime of work to be done, do the work, like that, I would hope would get some eyeballs on it, but I kind of fear that it wouldn't. And I think, that isn't, it's a strong message for him to send at the end of this video or this presentation, the lecture. I just wonder if anybody's going to take him up on it. It makes me kind of like, I kind of don't think so. I just kind of think like the people who, maybe I'm just selling society short here, or architecture as a profession short here. I don't know, but I do feel like that is not the view that the majority will take.
Well, it is hard not to be skeptical and cynical of the mission, because, people, I mean, if you think about it, like the time that it's taken the people of Hale County to stop being skeptical of the rural studio wasn't
right.
a few,
like, you mean like their intentions, basically.
Right. It's just, what are these kids doing here? What possible?
Why is the school here to take advantage of us? Yeah.
Exactly. And
that was the mentality or the perception that Peanut had in Citizen Architect.
Exactly. And it totally took decades, really, for them to
one project at a time. Right?
Yeah. It wasn't that, it's just like Peanut, just like Andrew, just like all of the people who are involved with the rural studio on long term, it takes a while for that essence to kind of like rub off on you. And
I think that's kind of what I'm getting to, though, is that it takes time and people aren't willing to spend it.
Right.
Or to experience it. You don't really spend the time, I guess, but it's, you know what I mean, right? It's being content and being okay with things taking time. And I do see a huge amount of pressure, and I guess it's just the way our profession is built, from moving from one project to the next and feeding the machine and churning out work so that we can just do more work. It doesn't speak to the contentment side and spending. I mean, our profession is built on spending as little time on things as possible. And what we're talking about here is affecting a community over decades. And the more time they spend there, the better it gets. It's just interesting how, like, capitalism rewards, in air quotes, the, performance. It's just do less for more money.
Well, so, back to this kind of like parting words of Rusty's, and that kind of like, I guess, almost an intuitive skepticism or inherent skepticism. You hear that, sure, kind of thing, like, okay, whatever. And the thing is that, we're to your last comment about capitalism rewarding whatever, it seems to, like, reward the people who are kind of like quick on it.
Efficiency, productivity.
Exactly.
Fast movers.
Rather than the slow moving, kind of like, let's do this right. Let's,
methodical.
Like, towns don't, like, if you think about it, some of the most successful towns that you've ever visited are things that have taken so much time to develop and grow and become a community. It didn't just happen overnight. So like the biggest skepticism of like all of these planned communities that pop up just like that,
it reminds me of Arrested Development's name of their housing tract, right? It was Sudden Valley.
And so you're that kind of like thought of capitalism is that kind of like happen overnight kind of thing. Is if it doesn't happen overnight, then you're not a success in capitalism, big air quotes there kind of thing, versus the slow burning. So when you go back to that comment about there's a lifetime of work there, kind of comment, it's because it takes a lifetime to enact real honest to goodness change, real honest to goodness connection.
It's like patience, right? It takes patience. I mean, when you say it takes a lifetime, who wants to sign up for that? I don't know, man. That's a big commitment.
Well, so it was
I don't
interesting.
necessarily think they planned it out like that ahead of time. Maybe they thought about that, but I don't know. I wonder. I don't know where we end this now.
How long has it been since you've actually bought a book, like an architectural book?
Oh, a while.
So I just, after that lecture, I happened to just be perusing. I don't know what it was, but there was this, when you start looking at one thing, it leads to another, and then you start getting these pop-up ads. And
now you're targeted. I see.
And so now I'm targeted. And it popped up with, from, Taschen Books, Small Architecture, and beautiful book, actually quite inexpensive, but I mean, it's just a snapshot of like tons of different designers, in like the small foot, these projects that have a small footprint but have a major impact, mostly
big design in a small package.
Exactly. But I think about like the work that they do there, and like the work that's being done at the Rural Studio. Think about some of my more favorite architects that are doing like community based work and things like that they're all doing them. They're doing these like big statement pieces on a very, very small scale, and it just and I remember like the very first project, and I've talked about this before, like eons ago, but my first project was a 20 by 20 maintenance shed in St. Petersburg, Florida, that was right next to this historic, beautiful historic hotel. And though I wasn't intending to make it match, I just wanted it to make it feel like it belonged there, because it was, it was at a park right across the street from this beautiful hotel. If anybody wants to look up the Vinoy Hotel in St. Petersburg, that's the hotel. And it's just this beautiful Mediterranean revival, just gorgeous pink hotel. And I did this like little thing right next to it, and it was just funny. It's like what it was was a maintenance shed for the community park right next to this. It was baseball fields. It had dog parks. It was like the local swimming pool. It was like a small and simple, but it was just trying to do big architecture in a little small package.
Mm-hmm. Were you successful with that?
I felt like for somebody who basically just graduated college and has had very little experience, it was pretty successful. And funny enough, it's still there.
Real project.
It was a real project, and it's still there. And it looks like they changed the roof out. Was probably the only like change that has happened over 22 years since the project was done. And but it was like you always remember that first project, but in this particular case, it was one of those projects that like it was weirdly community based, but I was trying to do high design and on a small budget.
Yeah I need more of that. I mean, that to me is what this kind of, there's so much opportunity out there to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You have to want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks to Enscape for their support of this episode. Visit enscape3d.com/archispeak today for a free 14-day trial. Thanks for listening. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. See all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what we're doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and don't forget to share it with your friends. We'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at archispeakpodcast.com, where you can find our entire catalog of shows. Talk to you soon.